The wild foal agonized, trapped by a rock in the icy creek. Robert Miller accelerated his Porsche, intending to drive past. He didn't have time for this. But when he recognized the old wooden bridge where he used to fish with his father, he slammed on the brakes. What he discovered in that place changed everything forever. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. Have you ever saved an animal in danger? Tell us. The story begins now. Robert Miller adjusted the knot of his Italian silk tie as he watched the red numbers on his computer screen. Another bankrupt ranch he would buy for half price. Across the mahogany desk, Mr. Thomas trembled, clutching his pen, his eyes moist and fixed on the contract that meant losing his family's land. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas, but business is business," Robert said without lifting his eyes from the screen. 40% of market value. It's my final offer." The old rancher murmured something about his grandchildren, about having nowhere to go. Robert continued typing emails. Sentiments didn't pay dividends. Compassion didn't build empires. At 58, he had learned that in the business world, hesitating out of pity was synonymous with weakness. Mr. Thomas signed with a trembling hand and left in silence. Robert didn't even say goodbye. 2 hours later, he was driving down a country road in his black Porsche, heading to inspect the newly acquired lands. The sun was beginning to set, painting the pastures that now belonged to him in shades of orange. Robert didn't see beauty in the landscape. He saw only numbers, profit potential, square feet converted into capital. His cell phone rang. It was Michelle, his only daughter. "Dad, I need to talk to you." "I'm busy. Schedule it with my secretary." "It's about Grandma's house deed. You can't just..." Robert hung up. Michelle lived in the past, clinging to sentimentalities he had abandoned decades ago. His mother's house would be sold like any other asset. Period. He sped down the dirt road, eager to finish the inspection and return to the city. That's when he saw the old wooden bridge ahead and something moving beneath it. A foal, small, no more than a few months old, with dark brown fur and a white blaze on its muzzle. The animal was partially submerged in the shallow creek, a thick rope tied to its left hind leg, pinning it to a large rock. The icy, late afternoon water made the colt tremble violently. Robert instinctively hit the brakes, but soon grumbled and accelerated again. Wild animals died in nature every day. It wasn't his problem. He drove straight past the bridge. But something bothered him. The image of the trembling foal, its big, frightened eyes, refused to leave his mind. Worse yet, that bridge. Robert knew that bridge. He used to fish there as a child, decades ago. 50 yards ahead, he stopped the car abruptly. He sat for a long minute, hands on the steering wheel, looking in the rearview mirror. The foal was still there, growing weaker. "Damn it," he murmured. He backed up to the bridge and got out of the car, annoyed with himself. His clothes cost more than most people's monthly salary. His leather shoes were imported from Italy. He shouldn't be doing this. But as he approached the creek and saw the foal up close, so young, so defenseless, struggling against the rope that cut into its skin, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in years, a pang in his chest that he chose to ignore. He took his Swiss Army knife from his pocket and stepped into the icy water. The foal struggled when it saw him approach, but it was too weak to flee. With 3 precise cuts, Robert freed the rope. The colt stumbled but managed to stand. It looked at Robert for a moment as if trying to understand, before limping away towards the trees. Robert returned to his car with ruined shoes and wet pants. But when he looked in the rearview mirror one last time, he saw the foal stop at the edge of the woods, looking back, vulnerable, alone, with an injured leg in territory full of predators. Against all logic, Robert turned off the engine. Robert sat in the car for 10 minutes, watching the foal that remained still among the trees, clearly disoriented. Its injured leg prevented it from moving normally, and the sun was almost setting. Foxes, mountain lions, even coyotes roamed that area at night. "This isn't my problem," he murmured to himself, starting the engine again. But he drove only 100 yards before stopping again. The image of the defenseless colt kept returning. Robert had never cared for animals. He considered pets an unnecessary sentimental luxury. So why couldn't he move on? He returned to the bridge. The foal was still there, now lying on the grass, visibly exhausted. When it saw Robert approach, it tried to stand, but collapsed again. "You're going to die there, aren't you?" Robert said softly, more to himself than to the animal. The idea of leaving the foal to the predators bothered him in a way he didn't understand. Perhaps it was just a matter of value. A young horse was worth a few $1,000s. Yes, that was it. A purely economic decision. With care and considerable difficulty, Robert managed to carry the foal to the trunk of his Porsche. The animal was too weak to resist, only trembling throughout the journey to the rural property he maintained on the outskirts of the city. The next morning, still wearing the same wrinkled suit from the day before, Robert called Dr. Henry, an experienced veterinarian who served the ranches in the area. "He's a young Mustang, Mr. Miller, completely wild, never been touched by humans before yesterday. About 4 months old, I'd say. The leg will heal well, but he'll need care for a few weeks." "How much is an animal like that worth?" Dr. Henry frowned. "Well, technically he's a wild animal. Legally, he should be returned to the wild after recovery. But in practice," he shrugged, "a trained colt like that could be worth between $10,000 and $20,000. But Mr. Miller, this foal has never been domesticated. He might never accept a saddle or bridle." Robert nodded, pretending that the information about value was his only concern. But when Dr. Henry left and he was alone with the foal in the makeshift paddock, he found himself observing the animal with a surprising intensity. The colt didn't approach, keeping a safe distance, but its dark eyes seemed to study Robert with equal curiosity. There was something in its posture, proud, independent, refusing to show fear despite the circumstances, that touched something deep within Robert. "Wild," he murmured, "like I used to be." Over the next few days, Robert found himself arriving at the property earlier, inventing excuses to check on the foal. He told himself he was protecting his investment, nothing more. But when Michelle called again, this time crying about the sale of their grandmother's house, Robert hung up with less abruptness than usual. On Thursday, he brought an apple and left it outside the paddock. The foal waited for him to move away before approaching and sniffing the fruit. It didn't eat it, but it didn't destroy it either. On Friday, Dr. Henry returned to examine the leg. "It's healing very well. He could be released into the wild as early as next week, Mr. Miller. By the way, where exactly did you find him? It's important for determining where to return him." When Robert mentioned the wooden bridge near the lands he had just acquired, Mr. Thomas's family lands, something strange crossed the veterinarian's face. "Pine Creek Bridge? Mr. Miller, those lands belonged to your father for many years, didn't they?" Dr. Henry's question hit Robert like a punch to the gut. Yes, those lands had belonged to his father, Daniel Miller, decades ago. Robert had sold everything after the old man's death 12 years ago, without a second thought. "Your father used to feed the wild mustangs that lived in that area," Dr. Henry continued, unaware of the impact of his words. "I was his vet back then. He said they were the last truly free horses in the region. He spent years protecting that herd." Robert remained silent, but inside he felt as if the foundations of his world were cracking. "After you sold the lands, Mr. Thomas continued the work. He protected the animals, ensuring they had water and food during dry spells, until he lost the property last week." The connection hit Robert like a lightning bolt. He had bought back his father's lands, and he had just found a colt descended from the very horses Daniel Miller had protected with such care. That night, Robert drove alone to his father's old house, now abandoned on the newly acquired lands. He hadn't been there in over a decade. Dust-covered furniture he vaguely recognized, yellowed photographs of a family that once was. In his father's bedroom, he found a worn leather journal. With trembling hands, he opened it to a random page and read, March 15th, 2010. Robert hasn't answered my calls in 3 months. Today I found a dead mare near the creek. Poisoning, probably. The neighboring ranchers want to get rid of the Mustangs. I'm old, but I'll keep protecting these horses. When Robert comes home, I want him to see that there are still wild and free things in the world. Things that cannot be bought or sold. Robert turned more pages, each entry a stab to his heart. April 22nd, 2011. The cancer is getting worse. I tried to call Robert today. His secretary said he was in a meeting, always in a meeting. The Mustangs had 3 foals this spring, life continuing even as ours fades. December 18th, 2012. Last Christmas I'll spend alone. Robert hasn't been home in 4 years. I left a letter with Dr. Henry explaining about the horses. Perhaps one day my son will understand that there are treasures that don't appear on balance sheets. Robert closed the journal with trembling hands. 12 years. His father had died alone while he was closing deals in New York City, conquering empires that now seemed like sandcastles. And now a wild colt, a direct descendant of the horses his father loved and protected, was in his care, as if the universe were giving him one last chance to honor the memory of the man he had abandoned. Robert returned to the city in a state of shock. For the first time in decades, he couldn't concentrate on work. During the morning meeting with the directors, as they discussed expanding operations on the newly acquired lands, he found himself thinking about the foal, his father, and the wild Mustangs that would soon lose their last refuge. "Robert, are you listening to us?" The voice of his senior partner brought him back to reality. "Sorry, continue." But he couldn't concentrate. The image of his father's journal, the words about treasures that didn't appear on balance sheets, echoed in his mind. When the meeting ended and he was alone in the room, Robert picked up the phone and did something he hadn't done in years. He called Michelle. "Dad, what a surprise. You never call." "About your grandmother's house," he said slowly. "I'm not selling it." On the other end of the line, complete silence. Then his daughter's choked voice. "Dad, are you okay?" Robert looked out the office window towards the distant mountains where a wild foal waited for him. "No," he answered honestly. "I don't think I've been okay for a long time." The next morning, Robert drove to the rural property with a strange feeling in his chest. The foal, which he had mentally begun to call Free, was stronger. Its leg had healed almost completely, and it trotted around the paddock with renewed energy. But it was when Robert got closer that he noticed something that made him stop abruptly. At the back of the paddock, partially hidden by bushes, was an old weathered wooden sign. Robert approached and wiped away the moss that covered the fire-engraved letters. Mustang Refuge, D. Miller, 1987. His father had created that place specifically to protect the wild horses, and Robert, in his haste to turn everything into profit, had never realized it. At that moment, his cell phone rang. It was his senior partner, Carl. "Robert, we need to talk. The Japanese mining company made an offer for the land you just bought. $50 million. They want to explore for iron ore in the region." $50 million. It was 3 times what Robert had invested in the property, an astronomical profit that would solve all his cash flow problems for the next few years. "There's a problem," Carl continued. "They want an answer today. If we refuse, they'll look for other lands. It's now or never." Robert looked at Free, who had stopped trotting and was observing him with those dark, intelligent eyes. He imagined the mining company's machines destroying that valley, poisoning the creek, forever eliminating the last refuge of the wild mustangs. "Robert, are you there?" "I'm thinking." "Thinking about what? It's $50 million. You could buy 100 properties like this one." But he couldn't buy back 12 years lost with his father. He couldn't buy forgiveness for the calls he never returned, for the Christmases he spent closing deals while Daniel Miller died alone. That afternoon, Robert did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He called the Japanese mining company and refused the offer. Carl showed up at his house 3 hours later, red with anger. "Are you crazy? $50 million, Robert, for what? A few wild horses? Because of my father's memory. Your father's been dead for 12 years. This isn't going to bring him back." Robert clenched his fists, feeling a rage he hadn't experienced in decades. "Get out of my house! Robert, get out!" Carl stormed out, slamming the door. 20 minutes later, Robert received a formal notification. His partners had voted him out of the company. In a matter of hours, he had lost $50 million. And control of the empire it took him 30 years to build. But when he arrived at the rural property and found free grazing peacefully under the sunset, something strange happened. For the first time in decades, Robert felt neither anger nor despair over the financial loss. He felt peace. He sat on the grass a few yards from the foal and to his own surprise began to speak. "Your grandfather was a better man than I am, boy. He never would have sold these lands. He never would have abandoned you all." Free raised his head, ears attentive, as if understanding every word. Robert took the last business card from the company that was no longer his and tore it into small pieces. The wind carried the fragments away, and with them, the person he had been for the last 30 years. When he left that night, Robert made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't just going to protect that land. He was going to dedicate the rest of his life to honoring the memory of the father he had abandoned. He would start by seeking out the people he had harmed over the years, starting with Mr. Thomas. 3 months later, Robert was unrecognizable. He had sold his city mansion and moved into a simple house on the rural lands, a few miles from the Mustang Refuge. He wore jeans and worn boots instead of Italian suits, and his hands, once manicured, now had calluses from physical labor. The first person he sought was Mr. Thomas. He found the old man living in a tiny rented house on the outskirts of the city, surviving on a meager pension. Robert knocked on the door one Saturday morning. When Mr. Thomas opened it and recognized him, immediate fear was etched on his face. "Mr. Miller, I don't have anything left for you to take." "I came to return something," Robert said simply, extending an envelope. Mr. Thomas opened it with trembling hands. Inside was the deed to the family ranch, transferred back into his name. No conditions, no interest, no catches. The old man looked at the document, then at Robert, then at the document again. "I don't understand." "My father knew you, didn't he? They protected the Mustangs together." Mr. Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes welling up. "Daniel was a good man. He said you'd come back one day, that you'd understand." Robert felt a tightness in his throat. He was right. It just took me too long. In the following months, Robert sought out other families he had harmed. The Garcia family, who had lost their home in a foreclosure process orchestrated by his company. Robert not only settled the debt, but paid 5 years of mortgage payments in advance. Mrs. Rodriguez, a widow whose small general store had been closed because she couldn't afford the exorbitant rents of a building Robert had bought and artificially inflated in value. He returned the property to her and even renovated the establishment. Not everyone forgave him. Some slammed the door in his face. Others accepted the reparation, but made it clear that money didn't erase years of suffering. Robert learned that redemption wasn't about being forgiven. It was about doing things differently. Meanwhile, Free grew strong and healthy in the refuge. Robert had expanded the fenced area and improved the facilities. but always maintained the wild character of the space. The young Mustang ran freely through the pastures, its muscles developing, its coat shining under the sun. But Robert knew that one day Free would leave. It was his nature. Wild he was born, wild he would remain. One afternoon, Robert was mending a fence when he received a visit from Michelle. His daughter had driven 3 hours from the state capital to see him. "Dad, you look different." Robert looked at his own dirt-stained hands, at his simple clothes, at Free grazing peacefully in the distance. "I feel different." "Are you happy?" The question caught him by surprise. When was the last time someone had asked him if he was happy? "I think so. For the first time in decades, I think so." Michelle approached the fence and watched Free, who was now a young, majestic horse, almost 2 years old. "He's beautiful. Will he always stay here?" Robert shook his head. "No. One day he'll leave, and that's okay. Some things in life aren't meant for us to own. They're meant for us to protect while they're with us." That night, father and daughter dined together for the first time in over a decade. They talked about the grandfather Michelle had barely known, about the wild horses, about second chances and lost time. When Michelle left, she hugged her father with tears in her eyes. "Grandpa would be proud of the man you've become." Robert stood on the porch, watching the lights of his daughter's car disappear into the darkness. And for a moment, he felt his father's presence beside him. 2 years passed. Robert, now 61, had completely transformed his life. The Mustang Refuge had become a recognized sanctuary, protecting not only the wild horses of the region, but also serving as an environmental education center for local schools. Free, now 4 years old, was a magnificent specimen of a Mustang in his prime. His brown coat shone like polished bronze. His defined muscles rippled under his skin with every movement. He had become the natural leader of a small band of Mustangs that Robert had rescued over the years. But Robert knew that day would come. It was a spring morning when it happened. Robert was repairing the watering trough when he heard a different whinny coming from the pasture. When he turned, he saw Free standing near the fence, looking fixedly at the distant mountains. There was something in the air, a call that only the wild could hear. For 3 days, Free remained restless, running back and forth within the paddock, his eyes always turned towards the horizon. On the 4th day, Robert made the most difficult decision of his life. He opened the gate. Free approached the opening cautiously, as if he couldn't believe he was truly free. He looked at Robert for a long moment. Those same dark eyes that had stared at him that afternoon by the creek 4 years ago. Robert stepped back, giving him space. "Go on, boy. That's what you were born for." Free took a few hesitant steps towards freedom. He stopped, looked back one more time, then galloped off towards the mountains. Robert stood by the open gate, watching until the Mustang's silhouette disappeared among the trees. There was no sadness in his heart, only a deep peace and the certainty of having done the right thing. That night, he found a letter in his father's drawer that he had never read. It was addressed to him, dated 2 weeks before Daniel's death. "Robert, if you are reading this, it means you have finally come home. I know you've become a successful businessman, and I'm proud of that. But I hope that one day you discover there is something more valuable than financial success, leaving the world a little better than when you arrived. The Mustangs living on these lands have been free for generations. They know no fences, contracts, or spreadsheets. They know only the wind, the rain, and the earth beneath their hooves. If one day you have to choose between profit and freedom, I hope you choose freedom. I love you, my son, I always have, even when you stopped answering my calls, even when you drifted away. A father's love doesn't need to be reciprocated to exist. Take care of the Mustangs. They will teach you things no university or company can teach." Robert folded the letter carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. A week later, he was mending the fence when he heard a familiar sound. whinnies in the distance. He looked up and saw, high on the hill, a familiar silhouette. Free was there, but not alone. Beside him, a wild mare, and between them, a small golden-coated foal. He had returned to show his family. Robert smiled, waved from a distance, and returned to work. Some treasures, he discovered, only multiply when they are set free. His father was right. The Mustangs truly had much to teach. 5 years after that day at the bridge, Robert sat on the porch of his simple home, watching the sunset paint the mountains golden. At 63, his calloused hands held a mug of warm coffee as his eyes followed the movements of a small herd of Mustangs grazing freely in the distant fields. Free still visited the refuge from time to time, always accompanied by his wild family, which had grown to 7 horses. His son, a golden foal Robert had mentally named Hope, was now 2 years old and showed the same independent spirit as his father. The sanctuary had expanded to protect over 37,000 acres of land, sheltering not only Mustangs but all the native fauna and flora of the region. Robert had invested his remaining fortune in creating a foundation that would ensure the protection of those lands forever. On that special afternoon, the 5th anniversary of his father's death, Robert received unexpected visitors. Mr. Thomas arrived accompanied by 3 teenage grandchildren who had come to meet the man who had returned their family's land. "Grandpa said you know all the wild horses by name," said the youngest, a girl with curious eyes. Robert smiled. "Not exactly by name, but I know their stories." He spent the afternoon telling stories about Free, about how a small, injured foal had changed the life of a man who thought money was everything. The children listened fascinated, asking questions about courage, about difficult choices, about the value of freedom. When the visitors left, Robert was left alone with his reflections. He took out his cell phone and did something that had become a ritual in recent years. He called each person he had harmed in the past, just to see how they were doing. Mrs. Rodriguez had reopened her general store and now employed 3 people from the community. The Garcia family had used their second chance to expand their business and prospered honestly. Not everyone had completely forgiven him, but all acknowledged that he had tried to do things differently. Michelle appeared at dusk, as she did every anniversary of her grandfather's death. She brought with her her young son, John, just 5 years old. "Grandpa Robert, where are the wild horses?" the boy asked. Robert pointed to the mountains, where soft lights indicated the presence of the herd. "There, John, living as they were born to live, free. And are they happy? Very happy, because they are being exactly what they are meant to be." That night, after Michelle and John left, Robert took his nightly walk to the refuge fence. The full moon illuminated the fields, and in the distance, he could see the silhouettes of the Mustangs resting. Suddenly, a soft whinny echoed through the night. Free emerged from the shadows, approached the fence, and stood there, as if he knew it was a special day. Robert extended his hand. Free approached cautiously and, for the first time in 5 years, touched his muzzle to the palm of the man who had saved him. "Thank you," Robert whispered. "Thank you for teaching me that some things only gain value when we set them free." Free remained there for a few minutes, then slowly moved away and disappeared into the darkness, returning to his wild family. Robert stood by the fence looking at the stars. He couldn't go back and be the son he should have been. He couldn't erase the years of coldness and greed, but he could be different today and tomorrow, and for the time he had left. His father believed in second chances. Free had given him his. Now it was his turn to pass it on. Because unlike numbers on spreadsheets, love and freedom were the only things that multiplied when they were shared. This story is about second chances, about realizing that it's never too late to change, to honor the people we love, to choose what truly matters. If you have someone you love but are distant from out of pride, out of anger, out of being too busy, don't wait to need a wild foal to teach you what truly matters. Call, write, show up. Because unlike Robert, you still have time. And if this story reminded you of someone, or if you believe in second chances, share it. We never know who needs to hear this today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.